So, is everybody back from the coffee? Because Theo is waiting to present to you. Please take your seats. So we put this on the agenda, new initiatives on saline farming, because we noticed during the 5 years we were working on this project, SalFar, there were more and more initiatives coming up from other places or from other people, and which we are connected to, likewise. And that was very nice. So we wanted to present you what is going on around SalFar. And this is in the first instance Theo Elzenga, professor of plant physiology at the University of Groningen. So we need somebody from the University of Groningen as well. We are in Groningen after all. Yeah? And Theo will present us the idea about the cluster, expertise cluster, salinization.
Okay, it's still morning. Good morning. I was glad that I was invited to present this initiative. It's an initiative that I would like to have claimed that we got the idea actually from the chairman of the last meeting that we had in SalFar in Leeuwarden, when Theo Elzenga in his end address actually mentioned that we needed to have regional expertise centers or institutes on salinization. I had that in my mind and worked on it, but then we were invited actually by the Prof of Friesland. And that is the real origin of this initiative. So what we have is the context of the initiative is actually a provincial council decision that the province should start something in coordinating an already fragmented projects that they had, but it failed to deliver, not in results, but in actually deliverables that would be useful for policymakers to base measures on. And they asked a consortium of people, institutes that are mentioned here around my slide. So it's the University of Wageningen, it's the University of Groningen, it's Deltares, a water expertise institute in the Netherlands. It's Van Hal Warenstein, the University of Applied Science. But also it's the question not to limit it to this consortium and expand the scope of the whole initiative that they envisioned. So the first idea was actually to bring together this consortium together with representatives of farmer organizations and talk about saline farming. And that immediately started already a discussion initiated by the farmers that said saline farming does not sound good with our farmers. I will explain later to you why that is. And so we actually derived from that already the first adjustments we made to the council of the province of Friesland wanted, that we actually made it an expertise cluster institute that was focused on the effects of salinization and how to deal with that. So in that discussion, we were given the assignment to actually develop a scope for this cluster and also to how to implement it. That is where we are at this moment. So what was the reason why the province asked this initiative? It's a large number of fragmented initiatives that in itself were successful. They produced an end report, but the end reports just remained in desks of people that were reported to. And they failed to sort of have a bigger impact on the community of farmers that could have benefited from it. There are a number of hardware possibilities. We have experimental farms, and those farms also have, one of the problems for these farms is that they have the expertise, they have funding, which is soft money most of the time, and what they are not being able to count on is persistent support from the research community, but also not from the governing bodies like the province or the country. So they work as an experimental farm on a project basis, which is for them creating a lot of problems. So they are asked to maintain a couple of fields with a biological approach, and then after 4 years the funding stops, and then they start to see the results of changing the management, and at that point actually they have to abandon the project. So they also were very interested in having a more long-term perspective on using these facilities. And so you saw one SPNA on your excursion yesterday, and that is one of the experimental farm that actually is very welcoming this initiative. There's also a couple of other initiatives. That's why we also made a little bit of haste for it. There is governmental at a provincial level initiatives that might compete with this initiative, and if you want to have some sort of beneficial support, then we have to sort of time it in such a way that we can have a couple of developments included in our plans as well. So what is the scope that we chose for this cluster? And that is the scope which is in general addressing the issue of freshwater limitation. So it's not so much salinization, but see salinization as a consequence of poor freshwater management, in a sense. What we want to maintain is cultivation of high-value open field crops, and I will explain later why that also came about. It's the marine clay zone along the Dutch coast that we are focusing on, and it should contribute to all the goals that we have for a more diversified and resilient type of agriculture, which is supported by an integrative approach that will enable us to maintain it. The sustainability for farming in a way that is both for society but also for individual farmers an economically feasible approach. And that the last one is actually the most important one. It goes a little bit against the presentation of before the coffee break, where we talked a lot, we heard a lot of good stories about how to market actually the products that come from saline-affected soils, or even embracing salinity and bring it in the Dutch situation. It could be bringing saline, brackish water on the inside of the dikes. There are projects, of course, that sort of experiment on that, but the main focus is on mitigation, not embrace the salinity problem, but try to limit the consequences and maybe even limit the salinization process itself. And this map, these 4 maps, are actually the basis of that approach. So what I have highlighted with the, what is it, dark blue shapes, is the area where we find these marine clays in the Netherlands. So we are here in the north, and we have a clay zone along the coast, continuing actually to the western part in another province, and then in the southwest in province of Zeeland, where we find very similar types of soil, but also very similar types of agriculture. It's also the area where the predicted salinization problem is the most severe. If we look at what is being cultured, it's mainly seed potato. And that is a type of cultivation that is very valued here. It is actually resulting in the last map, which indicates the profitability of the agriculture in the different areas in the Netherlands on different soil types. And what you can see is that almost exactly the coastal region where we are talking about, the marine clay, the part which is very sensitive to salinization, where we have the seed potato cultivation, it is very profitable culture. And so that is the reason why the farmers actually do not want to talk about bring salt within the dikes, on the inside of the dikes. That is an option that they want to postpone as as long as possible. So that's why we chose to focus on mitigation rather than on embrace salinization and go for the halophytic species. So where in the introductory slide of Louise, she mentioned a couple of things that could be under the umbrella of salinization. And the first one is actually maybe find new varieties of existing crops that can be cultured on moderately saline, I would have to say that, moderately saline fields, and that are still enabling the farmers to continue their cultivation practice as much as possible. If you look at the cause of the problem in the Netherlands, so what is presented in the second figure is actually the risk of running into salinization problems. It all depends on how the farming practice is using fresh water in their cultivation system. So the salinization at this moment in these areas has fairly little to do with sea level rise or climate change. It has to do with freshwater water management to a large extent. And so having this type of practice of saving as much fresh water as possible and trying to keep as much of the fresh water in the area where it comes as precipitation is actually one of the low-hanging fruit options actually to tackle some of the problems that we have. So what we propose is something that we call an expertise cluster rather than an institute. What we want to do is make as best use as we can of what we call the backbone, and those are the experimental farms in the areas which are belonging to the clay zone, which is salinity affected, and they have excellent connection with the farmers, with the sector, the whole value chain, but also with research, and we hope to improve actually the connection with education. That is the third goal that we have for this expertise cluster, that we want to bring the results into the education system. And that is, in our view, that's one of the essential benefits of tackling the problem in this way, that we have the ability to collect the expertise, to verify it with scientific methods, to validate it so that it's not based on anecdotes and individual small-scale problems, but it can be applied in general, and then bring it to the training programs for our future farmers. If you look, for instance, at the hydrological knowledge of our farmers now coming from the middle vocational training program, it's very, very limited. Maybe they have it, but not through their training. It's not part of their schooling system at the moment. And it involves both applied and fundamental science. And that is a way in which we envision also the expertise cluster to function, that if we bring together as many experts on the field, connected to these individual projects, and sometimes even not very well connected, if we bring them together, we can maybe start to identify those areas in which we are actually lacking the expertise still, and start research projects based on this type of analysis in which we see where the gaps are to tackle this problem in an efficient way. So the ambition is to develop the expertise from fragmentation into a coherent and integrated program, to validate best practices in a scientific way, maybe start to become a leading expert for similar areas. So we have this delta area here in the Netherlands, which is characterized with what I said, but there are, of course, multiple examples of river deltas that have the same physiognomy, the same type of problem developing with salinity, and also those areas are also in other countries the most high yielding and fertile areas, and so salinization will have a similar impact as it will have in the Netherlands. And if we can do that, if we can pull it off, that it sort of fulfills these ambitions, then it might also be a vehicle for these combined expertise cluster to actually attract large-scale funding for actually developing the projects that we envision them to be. This is more or less a summing up of what we want. We call it the 5 pillars. We want to actually make a connection between science and the farming practice, same as SalFar has done. It's the development and support of training modules that can be used more or less turnkey in the vocational training programs. So training our future farmers already with an awareness of the hydrology, which is underlying the salinity problems, to also use it to get a good map of where actually parts of our knowledge are still thin or lacking, to really give a hands-on approach and solve the problems for the farmers, to be also instrumental in getting the projects funded, and also to reach out to international partners and establish international collaboration. So I'm not going to go into these ones, more or less advertising why we are having the right ideas of getting this to work, but it's more marketing than actually science behind this line. So if there are any questions, I would like to answer them. Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you very much. I would say the slogan, mitigating as long as possible, adapting when it's no longer possible, is very, let's say, familiar to a Flemish perspective. I was just actually wondering, because maybe you're talking about the added value of seed potatoes, which is very much, I mean, that's the key driver of that economic development of Zeeland and the northern parts of Holland. Is it being discussed that saline farming could be a way of, let's say, opening up some water for that seed potatoes? Because if there is a shortage of water, is it being discussed that saline farming could be a way of, using less water for some farming activities so that the fresh water is available for the seed potatoes? And in that way, maybe the saline farming is actually something that is to be combined with the conventional freshwater farming, and together they make a resilient city. I don't know if that is being discussed.
It is certainly a possibility, but I think you are fairly aware of what the situation in the Netherlands is. So water is the daily bread of quite a number of people in this country, and of course these types of ideas, they are actually already ingrained in the policy from our national government, but also provincial ones. That's not where the problem lies. The problem lies with farming practices themselves. So in the Netherlands, there is a tradition that the level of a polder, so an area where the water level is being controlled, is actually just regulated in almost law-like decisions. And if you look at what's countering the salinization problem would need, those decisions are actually way, way too low. So storing fresh water for a longer time in an area above what has been agreed as the polder level would already mitigate quite a bit of the problems that we have at the moment. So most of the salinity problems actually in the Netherlands comes from below. So if you just drain a lot of fresh water away as soon as possible, according to the level decision for a polder, then actually this is what you get. So we do not really have a water shortage at the moment.
But there are projections that there is not enough water to drain out again and again. I mean, you're at the fringe of...
Yeah, but what we want is a 4-year period in which we actually have the time to find solutions for a different type of agriculture. And I think 40 years should be a realistic time frame.
I think we should stop here. Thank you very much, Theo, for this introduction. we quickly changed a little bit the speech, because Theo was mentioning green education. And we have a perfect example here from Frank Gaupels from the Ökowerk Emden, which are real pioneers, and which is a kind of, I would almost say, grassroots movement, which have started new initiative, which is even subsidized by the German government. And therefore I would like to have Frank coming up with a very short presentation of his educational project.
I'm Frank Gaupels from the Ökowerk Emden, and we are dealing with environmental and nature protection, and important is with education, information, and consulting. So we do also, in the practice, we also do nature conservation, but our main business is education information. And this project is linked to SalFar, and it's inspired by SalFar, but it's also touching a bit what the talk was about before. So it's the German title is, even for a German, is quite complicated. So you can see it in the left corner down. So don't care. The English title is much better actually. So it's about climate adaptation, and it's also related to water management, as you will see, and to a lot of agriculture topics. And it's funded by the Federal Ministry of Environment. So it's supposed to look and to inform about climate adaptations in the German coastal areas. So it's a national thing. And this is roughly the topics. So the overall topic is climate change and sea level rise. It touches a bit salinization, but I'm afraid our farmers also don't see the problem that there will be a lot of problems associated with salinization of soil. They also have more the problem with water management and sweet water or fresh water. It's about weather extremes. That's an issue in the coastal regions. About water management and land use, and also the conflicts between different players on land use. And the project is addressed to practitioners, so sometimes also to the public, but mainly to practitioners in agriculture, nature conservation, economy, a bit of tourism, politics and government, research, and our business education also, and media coverage. So this is an example of a workshop that we did. And this was about water management, and it shows. Is this the pointer? Ah, okay. I don't know what that is. Anyway, it's about water management, and so in Eastern Frisia, it's a bit the same like in the Netherlands. So there is really rules about the water level in the area, and there is also it's really active management, and you have certain water levels and polar levels, and this is strictly regulated. And there is always discussion what is the perfect level of water in the area. And there's different interests, and agriculture, and also tourism a bit, and nature conservation, and there's always a fight about it. And there's of course also different conditions. So it's you have to get rid of the water if there's too much, and that's what we also visited. So there is a pumping station, quite powerful pumping station to get rid of the water in times of heavy rainfalls, or if there's in general too much water in the area. But you also have to retain the water and have some water for drought periods. And this is really difficult to manage. And that's what this workshop was about, just discuss who needs what, and why, and when, and how much. And this is a quite complicated issue also in East Frisia. So, and one example was also a weather extreme that we had in Germany last year. And this was a large flooding event in the Ahrtal, and 180 people died. And the question was, can something like this also happen in our area? And actually, it sounds a bit odd, because it was in a region with hills, and there was a really strong flood in this area, but it can also happen in East Frisia, because it was very, very particular weather event with long rainfall, strong rainfall, and this happens very rarely, but it could also happen in the northern parts of Europe or in East Frisia, and we discussed how this kind of extreme weathers can be managed, but also how water levels are managed in general. That's one example, and also the example of this water or flooding polders. This is one example of conflict of interest. So the discussion is, if there is dry summers, so how can we store water? And one idea is this kind of flooding polders. So there's an area which is flooded with fresh water, and then you have this kind of storage of water. But there the problem is the farmers don't like it, because you lose a lot of land. And also nature conservation organizations, they don't like it, because there is a lot of areas for bird protection, and if you flood them, you lose these areas. On the other hand, it's also clear that sometimes, and at the moment it's not frequently the case, but sometimes farmers really suffer from water shortage. And that's now at the moment it's not a big problem. Actually, one farmer told me that the best years were the few years where there was drought in the summer, because then they could work really on the field. And otherwise it's difficult. But yeah, now the question is it really true that we will have more dry summers and drought periods, and what to do, and if we need this kind of flooding polders? And there we bring together the practitioners and discuss what might be the options. So water management is an important issue. And we also had workshops with the farmers and discussing with them, so what are the challenges and the advantages of being a farmer in the coastal region. And so we don't have these rich farmers that we saw yesterday in the potato areas here. We have many farmers growing cattle, and because we don't have this really beautiful soils, at least not as much as you have. And so we have rather poor soils, a lot of meadows, cattle, and so it's a bit different. But anyway, there's also, again, topics where water management, land use conflicts, so there's increased demand, for instance, for these flooding polders of land, and also for building houses and whatever, and industry, and there's always conflicts on this. And some are also related to climate change, like with the water management. And it's also about regional marketing. So one of our farmers was really immediately, directly at the coast, situated near the Knokstativ, where a lot of water is released from the area. So there is a pumping station, and there is also conflicts between nature conservation and